He found a flaw that could ground every plane on Earth. Then they handed him a box and walked him out the door. 11 years, 0 mistakes, 1 warning they refused to hear. And now, a single father with no job and a quiet house. By day, nobody would hire him. By night, he drove strangers home safely, still watching the skies, still waiting for the truth to catch up. Then, on an ordinary Thursday morning, every plane on that system went silent at once. And only one man on Earth knew exactly why. The company that let him go needed him more than ever. And from his own kitchen table, one engineer was about to save the very planes he was never trusted to warn about.
If you have ever been told you were replaceable, watch this until the very end. Because what happened to this man will make you question everything you believe about loyalty, power, and the people who sign your paycheck. Before we begin, if stories about justice, redemption, and the quiet strength of a father fighting for his child move you, hit that subscribe button right now and tap the bell, because this story is about to take you somewhere you will not see coming. Daniel Reyes was 38 years old, and for 11 years he had been the kind of employee every company claims to want, but rarely deserves. He was a senior avionics systems engineer at Skycore Aviation Systems, the company that built the flight control software running inside nearly 60% of the commercial aircraft, crossing the sky at any given moment. Daniel had sandy brown hair that was always a little too long because he never had time for a haircut, tired but kind hazel eyes behind a pair of rectangular black glasses, and a lean frame that came from skipping lunch more often than he should have. He wore the same navy blue Skycore polo shirt every single day, the company logo stitched crookedly over his heart, because the tailoring machine had messed it up years ago and nobody had ever fixed it. In his wallet, tucked behind his employee badge, was a photograph of his 7-year-old daughter, Mia, missing her 2 front teeth, laughing on a swing. That photograph had survived 4 office moves, 2 badge replacements, and 1 very difficult year that Daniel did not like to talk about. 3 years earlier, Daniel's wife, Sarah, had died in a car accident on a rainy October night, coming home from the grocery store with a birthday cake for Mia's 4th birthday. Since that night, Daniel had been both mother and father to his daughter, waking at 5 in the morning to braid her hair before school, working through his lunch breaks so he could leave the office by 5:30 to pick her up, and staying awake long after she fell asleep, reviewing flight software code by the light of a small desk lamp so he would not disturb her. He never complained. He never asked for sympathy. He simply did the work, and he did it better than almost anyone else in the building. There was a particular ritual Daniel and Mia shared every morning that none of his coworkers knew about. Before he left for the office, he would kneel down at her eye level, tap her gently on the nose, and say the same 6 words her mother used to say to her. Be brave. Be kind. Be you. Mia would repeat it back to him, half asleep, missing teeth and all, and only then did Daniel feel steady enough to walk out the door and spend 9 hours staring at flight control, code that had to be perfect, because somewhere above the clouds, some other father's daughter was trusting a machine Daniel had helped design to bring her home safely. He kept a small laminated card with those same 6 words taped inside his desk drawer at Skycore, hidden beneath a stack of old technical manuals, a private anchor on the days the pressure of the job threatened to overwhelm him. Daniel had joined Skycore straight out of graduate school at 27, hired by a mentor named Frank Delgado, who had since retired, but still called Daniel every few months just to check in. Frank used to tell him that avionics engineering was not really about airplanes at all. It was about trust, an invisible contract between an engineer sitting at a desk and a stranger sitting in seat 22C who would never know that engineer's name but was placing their life in his hands anyway. Daniel had carried that idea with him for 11 years. Through promotions he did not chase and recognition he rarely sought, quietly becoming the engineer other engineers went to when something did not look right, the one who reread specifications twice and asked the uncomfortable questions in meetings that ran too long specifically because he asked them. Colleagues respected him. Some, privately, found him exhausting, a man who could not simply let a minor inconsistency slide because the deadline was close and everyone was tired. Daniel had heard the word difficult used about him more than once, always secondhand, always from someone who would never say it to his face. He accepted it. He had made peace, a long time ago, with being the kind of person who slowed a room down if slowing. The room down meant nobody in seat 22C ever had to find out the hard way that something had been missed. That was exactly the problem. 6 weeks before the day everything changed, Daniel had been running a routine validation check on a new firmware update called Horizon 7, a critical patch meant to improve fuel efficiency and automate certain descent calculations across Skycor's entire commercial fleet software. It was scheduled to be pushed to more than 4,000 aircraft across 19 airlines within the month. On a Tuesday night, while everyone else in the department had already gone home, Daniel found something buried in the code that made his stomach drop. Under a very specific and rare combination of altitude, temperature, and sensor latency, the new firmware could cause the automated descent system to misread barometric data by a fraction of a degree, just enough to trigger a delayed correction in the aircraft's altitude hold function. It was not obvious. It was not something a normal test would catch. But Daniel had seen enough near misses in his career to know that in aviation, small errors were never really small. He stayed until 2 in the morning rerunning simulations, and by dawn, he had a report that could not be ignored. Horizon 7 was not ready. It needed at least 6 more weeks of testing before it could be trusted with human lives. He brought the report to his direct supervisor, a sharp, ambitious woman named Renata Cole, who had been Daniel's friend since the day she was hired, back when she was still new, and Daniel had trained her on half the systems she now oversaw. Renata had climbed quickly, and everyone in the department joked that she was destined for the executive floor. Daniel trusted her completely. He had covered her shifts when her mother was sick. He had recommended her for 2 promotions. When he handed her the Horizon 7 report, he expected her to take it straight to leadership, exactly as protocol demanded. Instead, Renata read it in silence, closed the folder, and said something Daniel would replay in his mind for weeks afterward. She told him the launch date had already been promised to Skycor's as 3 biggest airline clients, that the CEO, a cold and calculating man named Victor Ashford, had personally guaranteed the board that Horizon 7 would ship on schedule to secure a renewal contract worth nearly $400 million, and that reopening testing now would not just delay the launch, it would humiliate Ashford in front of the board 2 weeks before a major shareholder vote. Renata told Daniel, very quietly, to simply adjust his report, soften the risk language, change critical failure potential to minor anomaly requiring monitoring. Nobody would ever know the difference, she said, because the specific conditions required to trigger the flaw were so rare they might never occur at all. Daniel refused. He told Renata that he had spent his entire career building systems that kept strangers alive. 35,000 feet in the air, people's mothers, people's children, people just like the ones sitting in row 14 holding their kids' hands during turbulence, and that he was not going to quietly bury a warning that could save lives, just so a shareholder vote would go smoothly. Renata's expression changed in that moment, and Daniel saw something he had never seen in her before: fear. Not fear for the passengers, fear for herself. She warned him, almost gently, that going over her head on this would not end well for him. Daniel did it anyway. He sent the unedited report directly to the Safety Review Board and copied it to Victor Ashford himself, believing, foolishly perhaps, that the truth would simply speak for itself. It did not. 4 days later, Daniel was called into a small glass-walled conference room on the 9th floor, the one usually reserved for terminations, and he knew before anyone said a word. Victor Ashford was not there. He never was for things like this. Instead, it was Renata, sitting beside a human resources officer holding a thin folder, unable to look Daniel in the eye. The official reason given was insubordination and failure to follow proper reporting channels, resulting in unauthorized escalation and reputational risk to the company. 11 years of near-perfect performance reviews, 3 commendations, and a spotless safety record were reduced to a single sentence on a termination letter. Daniel was walked out of the building he had helped build software for since he was 27 years old, carrying a small cardboard box with a photo of Mia, a coffee mug she had painted for him in kindergarten, and nothing else. He did not cry in the parking lot. He waited until he got home, until Mia was asleep, and then he sat alone in his kitchen at midnight and let himself feel it, just once, before folding it away and deciding that tomorrow he would start looking for work. Because rent was due on the 1st, and Mia needed new shoes for school. For 6 weeks, nothing happened. Daniel applied to 11 companies. He got 2 interviews and 0 offers. Because in the tightly connected world of aerospace engineering, word travels fast, and left Skycore under difficult circumstances was the kind of phrase that made hiring managers quietly move on to the next resume. He started driving for a rideshare app in the evenings after Mia went to bed, just to keep the lights on, still wearing his glasses, still keeping that photograph of Mia in his wallet, still checking aviation safety bulletins every single night out of habit, half hoping he was wrong about Horizon 7, half terrified that he was right. One night, a passenger climbed into the back seat of Daniel's car, exhausted after a delayed connecting flight, and mentioned, almost as small talk, that she worked as a flight attendant and had just spent 6 hours managing anxious passengers through a rough patch of turbulence on a regional jet. Daniel asked, out of habit more than curiosity, which aircraft type and which airline. When she answered, his stomach tightened, because it was one of the fleets already running Horizon 7. He said nothing about his own history. He simply told her, quietly, that she and her crew did important work, and that he hoped she got some rest. She thanked him, a little surprised by the sincerity in a stranger's voice, and Daniel drove the rest of his shift in silence, gripping the wheel a little tighter than usual, wondering how many more nights he would spend, carrying strangers safely to their front doors, while the report sitting unread in some Skycore archive kept ticking like a clock nobody else could hear. Money grew tighter with each passing week. Daniel quietly sold his watch, a gift from Sarah on their 5th anniversary, not because he wanted to, but because Mia needed new shoes and a permission slip fee for a school field trip, and he had promised himself long ago that his daughter would never once sense the walls closing in around their small apartment, no matter how thin those walls actually were. He picked up extra driving shifts on weekends, timed carefully around Mia's gymnastics class, and in the in-between hours, sitting in parking lots waiting for his next ride request. He kept a small notebook where he continued, almost obsessively, to track any new aviation safety bulletins mentioning descent automation anomalies. Friends told him to let it go, to move on, to stop checking a system that clearly did not want to hear from him anymore. Daniel could not explain to them why he kept checking anyway, except to say that some worries do not leave simply because you have been asked to leave the building. Then, on a Thursday morning in the middle of the busiest travel week of the year, he was right. It began quietly. A regional flight over the mountains reported a brief but unexplained altitude deviation during descent, corrected automatically within seconds, logged as a minor anomaly. Within 2 hours, 4 more incidents were reported from 4 different airlines on 4 different continents, all running Horizon 7, all showing the exact same barometric misread pattern Daniel had flagged 6 weeks earlier. By noon, aviation regulators in 3 countries had independently issued emergency directives. By 2 in the afternoon, Skycore's own systems, the very software running underneath nearly every major airline's descent automation, began triggering automatic fail-safes across the network as the anomaly cascaded through. Interconnected fleet management servers that had never been designed to handle synchronized, false alerts from thousands of aircraft at once. Airports began grounding departures as a precaution. Air traffic control centers in 17 countries issued simultaneous holds. News channels broke into regular programming with a single staggering headline. Every commercial aircraft running Skycore's Horizon 7 system, more than 4,000 planes, was being grounded worldwide, mid-holiday travel season, with no clear explanation yet from the company. Daniel found out the same way everyone else did, standing in his kitchen, phone in one hand, spatula in the other. making Mia pancakes before school, watching the news scroll across his phone screen. His hands went cold. He knew immediately, with absolute certainty, exactly what had caused it, because he had written the report that predicted it 6 weeks earlier and had been fired for refusing to bury it. He had every right, in that moment, to feel something ugly. Vindication laced with rage. A part of him, a very human part, wanted Victor Ashford and Renata Cole to feel exactly the humiliation they had been so desperate to avoid. Wanted the board to watch their $400 million contract collapse in real time. Wanted the world to know that a single father who drove a rideshare car at night had been right, and they had been wrong, and they had thrown him away for it. He sat Mia down at the table, kissed the top of her head, and told her that Daddy needed to make an important phone call before school, and that everything was going to be okay. He did not call Skycorps. He did not call Victor Ashford. He called the National Aviation Safety Board investigator whose name was on the emergency directive that had just been issued, a woman named Investigator Priya Anand, and he told her, calmly and precisely, exactly what he had discovered 6 weeks earlier, exactly what conditions triggered the flaw, exactly what fix needed to be pushed to every affected aircraft, and exactly what had happened to him when he tried to report it through the proper channels. He offered to send her the original unedited report, time-stamped and unaltered, still sitting in his personal email from the night he sent it to Ashford directly. Investigator Anand listened to every word without interrupting once. When Daniel finished, there was a long pause on the line, and then she said something that made Daniel finally sit down at his kitchen table, legs suddenly unsteady beneath him. She told him that grounded aircraft were only the beginning of the problem, because 3 flights already airborne when the anomaly triggered were currently being manually monitored by their crews, still trusting an automated descent system that could misjudge their altitude at the exact wrong moment, and that if his diagnosis was correct, his fix might be the only thing standing between a controlled emergency and a catastrophe. She asked him to send the report immediately and to stay by his phone. For the next 4 hours, Daniel Reyes, unemployed, uninsured, driving a rideshare car 3 nights a week to make rent, became the single most important engineer in the world, without ever leaving his kitchen table. He walked Investigator Anand's technical team through the flaw in real time over a video call, sketching diagrams on the back of Mia, Anne's old-school worksheets, because he did not have a proper whiteboard anymore. He identified the exact patch sequence needed to correct the barometric miscalculation without requiring a full system shutdown, something that would have taken Skycorps' remaining engineering team, working blind without his 6 weeks of prior analysis, at least another full day to reconstruct. A day that 3 airborne aircraft crews did not have to spare. Mia sat quietly in the corner of the kitchen with her coloring book, occasionally looking up at her father's face. Too young to understand exactly what was happening, but old enough to understand it mattered, because she had never seen him look like that before, focused and steady and, for the first time in 6 weeks, entirely certain of who he was. By 6 in the evening, the corrected patch had been verified by an independent aviation safety lab and quietly, urgently pushed to the 3 airborne aircraft first, then to the grounded fleet worldwide. All 3 flights landed safely. Passengers on those planes never knew, in that moment, how close they had come, or whose kitchen table the solution had come from. The story could have ended there, quietly, with Daniel simply having done the right thing and slipping back into obscurity. But aviation disasters averted still leave a trail, and reporters covering the grounding had already begun asking the one question Skycorps desperately did not want answered. How did the safety board identify the fix so quickly, mere hours after the crisis began, when Skycorps' own engineering department, fully staffed and fully resourced, had no answer at all? Investigator Anand, under no obligation to protect a company that had buried a known safety, report to save a shareholder vote, answered that question fully and on the record during a press briefing that evening. She stated plainly that a former Skycorps engineer named Daniel Reyes had identified this exact flaw 6 weeks prior, had submitted a full report through the correct channels, and had been terminated from his position 4 days after doing so. She stated that without his report and his real-time assistance that day, the outcome for at least 3 flights and their passengers could have been very different. The story detonated across every news outlet within the hour. Not the grounding. Daniel. Overnight, Daniel Reyes went from a man who could not get a callback for an entry-level engineering job to a name being read aloud on every major news network in the country. Reporters found his old employee badge photo. They found former colleagues willing to speak anonymously about how Renata Cole had pressured Daniel to alter safety language in his report. They found the termination letter leaked by someone inside Human Resources who had quietly disagreed with the decision from the very beginning. Within 48 hours, Skycor's stock had dropped 19%. Its 3 largest airline clients had publicly demanded an independent third-party safety audit before resuming any further contract renewals, and the board of directors, the same board Victor Ashford, had been so desperate to protect from a delayed launch, called an emergency session that lasted into the early hours of the morning. Victor Ashford resigned 2 days later in a short, carefully worded statement that never once used the word sorry. Renata Cole was placed on immediate administrative leave, pending an internal investigation, and within a week, her own name appeared in an internal email trail, released as part of the safety board's public findings, explicitly documenting her belity instruction to Daniel to alter the risk classification in his original report. It was, in black and white, the exact betrayal Daniel had felt in that glass conference room. No longer just his word against theirs, but proof, permanent and undeniable. Daniel did not go on television. He did not do a victory lap. Reporters camped outside his apartment building for 3 days, and he politely declined every single interview request, because the only thing he cared about that week was making sure Mia still got to school on time and still had her Friday night pizza, tradition undisturbed by cameras in the parking lot, when a producer from a national morning show finally reached him by phone, offering an appearance fee larger than he had earned in the entire previous year combined. Daniel asked only one question. Would the interview require him to say anything he did not personally believe was true? When the producer, confused, said no, of course not, Daniel agreed to a single, brief appearance on the condition that Mia's face and name were never shown or mentioned. In that interview, sitting stiffly in an unfamiliar studio chair, still wearing his glasses, Daniel said something that would be quoted in headlines around the world for weeks afterward. He said he never wanted revenge. He said the moment he found out about the grounding, sitting in his kitchen making pancakes, the only thing that mattered to him was making sure other fathers got to come home to their daughters that night, the way he no longer could with his wife. He said the system had failed him when it fired him for telling the truth, but he had made a promise to himself a long time ago that he would not let a broken system turn him into someone who stopped telling it. The new interim CEO of Skycor, a longtime engineer named Harold Whitfield, who had been passed over for the top job years earlier, specifically because he had a reputation for being too cautious, personally called Daniel 2 weeks after the crisis. He did not offer Daniel his old job back. He offered him a newly created position instead, Director of Flight Safety Integrity, reporting directly to the board, with the explicit authority to halt any product launch, any patch, any update, for any safety concern, without needing sign-off from anyone above him, including the CEO himself. It was, in effect, exactly the authority that, had it existed 6 weeks earlier, would have stopped Horizon 7 before it ever reached a single aircraft. Daniel asked for one additional condition before accepting, that Skycor fund an anonymous internal reporting line, reviewed by an independent safety board rather than internal management, so that no future engineer who found a dangerous flaw would ever have to choose between keeping their job and keeping passengers safe. Whitfield agreed without hesitation. Renata Cole was quietly terminated the following month, and in a strange twist that surprised even Daniel, she reached out to him privately, not through lawyers or public statements, but through a handwritten letter delivered to his apartment. In it, she admitted that she had been terrified that week, not of the flaw itself, but of disappointing the people above her, of losing the career she had spent a decade building, and that fear had made her ask Daniel to do something she knew, even as she said it, was wrong. She did not ask for forgiveness. She said she did not think she deserved it. Daniel read the letter twice, folded it carefully, and did not respond, not out of cruelty, but because he genuinely did not know, even now, what he would say. Some betrayals do not need a reply to be understood. 6 months later, Daniel stood at the front of a very different kind of room. Not a glass-walled termination office, but an auditorium full of new engineering graduates at a university career symposium, invited to speak about integrity in high-stakes engineering. Mia, now 7.5, sat in the front row with her grandmother, swinging her legs, occasionally waving at her father mid-speech, no longer missing her front teeth, but still, in Daniel's eyes, exactly the same little girl who had colored quietly in the corner of their full kitchen on the worst and most important day of his career. Daniel told the students, plainly and without exaggeration, that doing the right thing had cost him his job, his income, and 6 of the hardest weeks of his life outside the day he lost his wife. He told them that he did not regret a single hour of it, because the alternative was a version of himself he would not have been able to look his daughter in the eye and call a good example. He told them that the system does not always reward honesty quickly, and sometimes it punishes it first, but that the people who keep choosing honesty anyway are the shrew in the S. Every single day, he ended his speech with a single line that a student recorded and posted online, where it quietly gathered millions of views over the following weeks. They fired me for refusing to stay quiet. Every plane that landed safely that day is the answer I gave them back. After the applause faded, a young woman near the back raised her hand and asked the question. Daniel had been waiting for all afternoon. The one he suspected every nervous graduate in that auditorium actually wanted to ask. What do you do when telling the truth might cost you everything, and you are not sure you can afford to lose it? Daniel did not offer her a neat, comfortable answer, because he did not believe one existed. He told her only that fear and integrity are not opposites, that he had been afraid the entire time, sitting in that glass conference room, driving strangers around at midnight, staring at his daughter's school shoes and wondering how he would replace them, and that none of that fear had ever once told him he was wrong. Fear, he said, is simply the price some truths charge in advance. The only real question worth asking is whether you can live with yourself if you refuse to pay it. Daniel Reyes never got his old job back because he never wanted it. He built something better instead, not out of revenge, but out of the same quiet, stubborn integrity that had cost him everything, and then, in the end, given him back more than he ever expected to have again. And every night, when Mia falls asleep, he still checks the aviation safety bulletins, not out of fear anymore, but out of habit, and out of a promise he intends to keep for as long as he is able, that no father, anywhere, boarding any plane, anywhere in the world, should ever have to wonder whether someone like him was paying attention. Sometimes, late at night, Daniel still takes out that laminated card from his desk drawer, the one with Sarah's 6 words written on it in his own careful handwriting, and he thinks about how close he came to losing everything for saying a simple truth out loud. He thinks about Renata's letter, still folded in the same drawer, unanswered but not forgotten. He thinks about the passengers on those 3 flights who never knew his name, who landed safely and went home to dinner tables and bedtime stories of their own, never once realizing how thin the margin had been that day. He does not need them to know. He has never needed applause, only the quiet certainty at the end of each day that he told his daughter the truth when he tapped her nose that morning and said, "Be brave, be kind, be you," and that he had, in his own way, managed to live up to every one of those words when it mattered most. That, more than any title, any salary, any headline, is the only vindication Daniel Reyes ever truly wanted.